Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Oppenheim. I'm the artistic director of the Stella Adler Center of the Arts. And I'm so excited to be able to present this, I think, what will be a unique celebration of the life and work of Stephen Sondheim. Just some brief housekeeping. The conversation, we will converse for about an hour, and then we will open the floor and weave your questions into our conversation. So please feel free to type them into the Q&A. I notice there's an enormous amount of activity in the chat already, but I think questions in the Q&A. We will post the bios of all 5 bios of our extraordinary guests in the chat. And so I just want to quickly frame this. This conversation follows a previous conversation with Dr. Cornel West in dialogue with the writer Thomas Chatterton Williams and moderated by Colin Greer, entitled Absolute Condemnation of No One, Art in a Polarized World. And we want to post a link to that conversation also in the chat, and encourage you to look at it, and to assure you that we will continue to produce conversations that center art as an expression of our depth, complexity, nuance, and humanity. So in that previous conversation, with Dr. Cornel West repeatedly spoke of his love and admiration for Stephen Sondheim, and referred to Stephen as one of the greatest living geniuses of the theater. So when we lost Stephen on November the 26th, I reached out to Cornel to convey my condolences, and at the same time to my dear friends Joanna Gleason and Donna Murphy. And it occurred to me at that time that group of 3 people, with 2 Tony Award-winning actors who originated roles in Sondheim plays, and one of the great public intellectuals of our or any time, would make a fascinating conversation about Stephen Sondheim, and one befitting of Stephen's capacity and inclination and ability to communicate depth, complexity, nuance, and humanity. And then on about 4 days later, on the 30th of November, I read a beautiful piece in the New York Times by John McWhorter, entitled Stephen Sondheim's Music Had Me Walking on Air. I've never floated back down. And that clinched it for me. I just felt determined to bring these 4 extraordinary humans together to engage in this celebration. And I just needed only one more thing, which was a strong moderator. And I thought immediately of my dear friend, family friend, Jamie Bernstein. Jamie is deeply steeped in music and in theater, and in the music and theater of Stephen Sondheim. And like her father, a passionate advocate of art as a vehicle for the expression of depth, complexity, nuance, and humanity. And so here we are. It is a great honor and a pleasure to introduce you to Jamie and company. Jamie.
Hello. Thank you, Tom, so much. And thank you to Stella Adler land, a land that I have been connected to all my life. And welcome to our wonderful panelists. Hello, Joanna. Hello, John. I'm going clockwise. Hello, Donna, and hello, Dr. Cornel. Hi, everybody.
Hello, hello. Yes.
Okay, and I want to jump right in this, but I just want to say first that I'm apologizing in advance in case I interrupt anyone in their remarks, because it falls to me as the moderatrix to keep things moving. So I do apologize in advance. And the other thing I wanted to say as a sort of pre-mortem is that I am not a Stephen Sondheim expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I am a lifelong fan. And also, of course, Steve Sondheim was a part of my family as I was growing up. He wasn't just my father's colleague and collaborator, but he was also a real friend of the family, and he was around on weekends and summer vacations, and we played word games together. And let me tell you, sitting at the anagrams table with Steve Sondheim is a real sink or swim experience. And here I am to tell the tale, but I won't tell that tale tonight. Anyway, this is all just to say that Steve Sondheim is very dear to my heart. So I'm thrilled at the opportunity to dish him with the four of you for the next hour, at which point we will then take a look at the questions and see if we have some time and capacity to answer some of them. So having said that, I wanted to jump right in with Donna and Joanna to begin, because I'm very curious to know how you feel as actresses, as women of the theater, about doing the works of Sondheim and how your interaction with him was and what the dynamics were, and also whether or not you have seen the most recent production of Company in which Bobby was turned into a woman. So those are all my questions for the two of you. Go.
Go. Joanna, I'll let you start. You should start. Okay. Them first. Here's the thing. When I was lucky enough in my life to work for Steve and then with Steve in Into the Woods, it was the first time I felt I had the opportunity to play a character who was always working at the top of her capacity to make herself understood. And that's how Stephen writes, so that you endlessly are thinking while you're singing. And the great thing about that book is that the character that James Lapine wrote and the songs that Steve wrote with the lyrics were the same person. And the thought process continued, it was continuous. It never looped back on itself. And it requires a lot of mental energy to do a Sondheim show. And I was grateful because I always was nervous about singing. You can hear the great Flemish singer right now. That Steve was the one who assured me, he said, it's the same person. It's the same person. It's you as the baker's wife who also sings. Just get it out of your head that there's any vocal obligation beyond what it is you bring. And that to me was the new world.
Fantastic. Donna?
I had been a huge admirer of Steve's work, and I remember the first show that I saw in New York, production of his, was while I was doing my first professional job, which was a very lighthearted, terrific show called They're Playing Our Song. I was having fun doing it. It was a dream to be on Broadway. I was 20 years old, and on a day off, I went and saw Sweeney Todd, and I went, oh dear God. Yeah, this can also be musical theater. Now, certainly I'd listened and seen a pretty wide range of musical theater because I was obsessed with it from the time I was very young. But it just took my breath away, and it set this sense of purpose in my desire to keep raising the stakes of what I wanted to pursue as an actress. And I'd studied with Stella. I had just come from studying with Stella, and she was so much about the responsibility of an artist and the opportunity that you have to contribute to how the world converses and how the world perceives situations and et cetera, et cetera. So I watched that show, and it really shifted things for me. When Passion came along, I'd auditioned for him quite a few times, had come down to the wire on a number of things, but Passion happened exactly when it was meant to happen for me, in that I was ready to be in the room and to have a real conversation. And I'd been just so starving to work with a writer like him and like James, who, as Joanna was talking about, everything was justified and everything was connected. And there was no additional work to do as an actress to try to figure out, how do I make this seem like from this dialogue, I'm justified, this character is justified, and it makes sense for her to now sing. I didn't have to do that work. He did that work. James did that work. And so it just felt like an incredible partnership when I wasn't pinching myself and saying, dear God, do I really belong in the room?
Yeah. I guess we share that same feeling of seeing your first Sondheim show, you know, already being, and when I saw Follies and when I saw Company, I was really like a kid at the World's Fair with her nose pressed up to the glass of the House of the Future. I said, you know, I don't know how to get through this glass. I just know I need to be there. And that feeling, Donna, when you just pinch yourself and say, I'm here.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. And you know, it's true about how Steve worked in every single detail to help the performer know what to do. And earlier today, Tom Oppenheim very kindly sent us all a link to one of this incredible trove of interviews that Mark Horowitz of the Library of Congress did with Steve Sondheim in his house. And the first one has been posted on YouTube. And it's extraordinary. And it's all about passion. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Donna, but don't miss it. But he goes, and it's very touching because Mark Horowitz brings these manuscripts of Steve's and handles them with white gloves, like they're the most precious jewels. And he asks all these really technical musical questions. It was way over my head. But Steve talked about how he figured out in Sweeney Todd, you know, exactly when, during the letter writing number, exactly when he should dip his pen and when he should make this gesture, and it's all worked right in. And you know, the actor thought that it was all being just, you know, business being invented on the spot for the actors, but no, Steve had it all worked out. That's so him, right?
Yeah, when he gave notes, the first time I was present at a note session, I listened to him give notes to two other actors. And I literally my heart was beating so hard. I was so excited about the opportunity to listen to him deliver that kind of manna from heaven, because the notes were so precise, but not restrictive. It was just giving you further information about the world that this character, which had been existing in his mind and in James's mind, with these characters, the world they existed in, and the reason that this was an eighth note and not a quarter note was because she thought she heard something in the next room, and so she needed to take a quick breath, not a long breath, because she wanted to continue saying what she had to say. But it was that kind of specificity, and I thought, I live and breathe for this, and I work hard to try to do it myself, but I just can't wait to see what he has to say, and it's astounding.
It is astounding. Was it intimidating to work with him, or did he warm you up? You know, he was notoriously, could be snarky as can be. And so I was wondering whether that was the experience you had working with him, or whether he was supportive. What was it like?
He was, I was not, I mean, the audition, of course, I was auditioning for Zeus, you know, that was its own thing. But as we worked together and we became friendly and friends, his notes, by the way, were always an offering for the actor to come with something more or substitute for something, and or. My entire song in Act 2 is about or and and. Mm-hmm. And he presented the notes in such a way, because there was an art to giving a note to a creative person, because all of our nerve endings are on the outside of our bodies. And he found the way to inspire you to go discover. He never really closed any doors, and that was extraordinary.
Yeah, it is fantastic.
I agree with that. I do remember early in the process with Passion, with the workshop, that he was giving me some notes about a particular piece, and it felt like he was pushing me in a direction, and I went there. But I remember my sort of inner compass saying, this doesn't feel right on me, but I need to give it time and we need to see. But at one point, Paul Gemignani, who was our musical director, questioned how far Steve was pushing me to go with this particular note, and he actually said, "It's getting a little Norma Desmond, isn't it, Steve?" And Steve said, "What's wrong with that?" You know, and then we had this brief conversation, and I remember going home and listening back to the I taped the rehearsal, and really questioning if that's what he wanted. I thought, I can do it, but I don't think it's the best fit. But it's so early, and I'm certainly not going to say I'm not doing that or I'm leaving. I just had to keep trying. And the next day I had a conversation with, but I did say to my husband, I'm afraid I might be fired. I'm afraid they may have discovered, my, well, the real me that isn't capable of doing this, all that self-doubt that can surface. And my husband said, look, it's a workshop. This is exactly the time for you to be getting to know each other and exchanging ideas. And the next day, James Lapine took me for a little walk, which I also thought, well, clearly I'm going to be fired. I'm being taken for a little walk down the hall. But he said, that was so great that you had that dialogue. It wasn't a debate. It was a conversation. And this character has been living in Steve's head alone. I mean, he and James were sharing conversations, but he's been writing these songs, and that song, that aria that you were working on together now, it was the first time he was really working with someone else and letting another voice in, both literally and figuratively. And so we continued the work, and I found that for somebody who was so specific, he was incredibly collaborative. And as Joanne said, he was offering something for you to consider and for you to try, and urging you to continue going further as you explored.
Yeah, that's a very generous way of being collaborative when you're the author. So good for him for doing that. I'd like to turn to John McWhorter right about now. And since you're a person who really thinks about language, and Steve Sondheim is a master of language. And so I was hoping you could tell us a little bit what your own thoughts are when it comes to thinking about the way Sondheim uses language and puts it to the purpose of drama and music.
Well, I would have to say that the truth is that I'm not usually deliberately wearing my linguist hat when I experience Sondheim's music. It's my kind of other me hat, but I know what you mean. And for me, the truth is, somebody asks you who's your favorite poet, and you feel like you're supposed to get a book off the shelf and it's supposed to be, Edna St. Vincent Millay, or it's supposed to be Maya Angelou or somebody like that. And the truth is, and I've never said it in company, the truth is that Sondheim is my favorite poet. I've always thought of his lyrics as hitting me where poetry would. It's not Elizabeth Bishop, it's Sondheim. And that's because he was so sensitive to not only the meanings, but the resonances of words. He knew what a rhyme was, and he never missed. So for example, there are times and actually he would point this out, there are times when Loren's heart would miss. You could tell that he was having a bad day. There are things in a lot of Rodgers and Hart that don't quite rhyme, or the stress isn't right, and you don't mind because it's Rodgers and Hart. Sondheim would never allow anything like that. And I remember actually the first Sondheim musical I saw, and the first time I thought of myself as taking in a musical and liking it, is later than many people would think. It was a community production, an excellent community production at the George Street Theater in New Brunswick in what would have been 1994, of A Little Night Music. And I remember when he first got me in terms of the words was in that magnificent sequence of Now, the song Now, when Frederick is wondering how to approach his much younger wife. And there's that wonderful business of, in view of her penchant for something romantic, the sod is too trenchant and Dickens too frantic, and Stendhal would ruin the plan of attack, as there isn't much blue in the red and the black. And everybody in this audience knows that there's even that much more. And I thought, how did he do that and the music is catchy as well. And this is about serious people. And so I thought to myself, wow, I wasn't raised with musicals, but I thought, I didn't know that this thing called musical theater could be that literate and that clever and catchy, kind of like Dr. Seuss, but it's actually about something and even better. And then I kept on listening to that number. And when the three songs came together, Now, Soon, and Later, I remember sitting there and thinking, this is God. I didn't know that this existed, but it started with the words. And so in general, with the two books that came out, I think those books are physically behind me. I don't know if you can see them, but the collections of all of Sondheim's lyrics, that to me is my favorite poetic anthology, because you can actually enjoy just reading the words in a way that you wouldn't I'm going to pick somebody at random. Jerry Herman. Jerry Herman has a melodic gift that many people a melodic gift that many people would kill for, great shows. I wouldn't want to sit and read the lyrics to even, and Donna, you were wonderful, even Hello Dolly. I don't want to just sit and read the words. You have to see the show. With Sondheim, he can be just poetry. And that's pretty amazing. That truly blew me away about him.
John, raisins, liaisons.
Raisins.
Raisins, liaisons, right? That's it.
Pushing it a little bit, but it's
Pushing it a
him, and
little
so it's
bit.
okay.
He gets away with it.
He can do that. Yeah.
He can. I mean, it is astonishing. And it's amazing that there came this moment about 20 or 25 years ago when it became apparent that this entirely new generation of young people was becoming obsessed with Sondheim. And, suddenly there were movies about camps where the kids were all into Sondheim and they were putting on Sondheim shows. And so this amazing author that we had always assumed was, at the intellectual pinnacle, was also completely accessible to young people. And I think that really put him in a whole new category that no one expected. And I think that was very refreshing. And Dr. Cornel, I recall your saying, maybe it was when you were talking with Tom Oppenheim in that earlier conversation, you talked about how Sondheim inserts a certain element of Chekhovian comedy into musical theater. And I thought that was such a fantastic observation. I wonder if you could share a little more about that with all of us.
Well, first I want to say I'm just blessed to be part of this conversation and salute Brother Tom, keeping alive that rich legacy of Stella Adler. But no, for me, Sondheim does lead us to Chekhov. In fact, in the interviews that I had and conversations with him, he would always say, all roads lead to Chekhov. I said, oh, that's my kind of brother. Because in fact, I had begun by saying he was the Tennessee Williams of the musical theater, which is to say he's a playwright in song. And so his artistic genius at the level of both lyrics as well as the music and also the text, I think my dear brother John is right. Those two texts that he's written, the most powerful memoirs ever written by an American composer, and is better than most of the literary cultural criticism of professors in the university who write on music. There's a level of genius, and we've yet to come to terms with that, you see. But what I meant was the injection of the tragic comic. You see, so it's Melville, it's Eugene O'Neill, it's Tennessee Williams, it's August Wilson, it's Toni Morrison. The tragic comic has to do with not just that underside, but it's the preservation of the playfulness and the compassion and the ambivalence and ambiguity and the ability to endure. See, that's the tragic comic. And when he agreed with me and said, oh, see, Brother West, one of the high moments for me is when he signed my book. And he said, from Brother Sondheim. I said, oh my God, you don't know what that means to me. Because I mean, I've always thought he was a very shy brother, so that for him to step forward like that, given all of these multi-level genius being manifest, and then being able to laugh at himself, laugh at others, and still really be a force for good. There is a moral dimension in Sondheim. Critiques of imperialism, the Pacific, and so forth and so on.
There is. I always feel like there's a kind of stealth humanity going on in so many of Sondheim's shows because he appears to be so quick on the trigger and almost bitchy and urban. And yet there is this undercurrent of tremendous empathy.
Absolutely.
Not to
They
mention,
talk about him. Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
go ahead, Joanna. You're better.
They talk about, it's easy to characterize Steve as being, cynical and catty and snarky, when in fact, the tenderest hearts, and he was one, need the most protection. And what he puts into his work is that the undertow always, that's the moral dilemma. Why are we here? Why do we feel so alone? So even in the comedy, there's this existential kind of, find me, make it safe for me. And it's in almost everything that he wrote. And that's that connection where you don't know why you're drawn in and you can't catch all the lyrics the first time, but something holds you.
The parallel between Chekhov and Sondheim really rings for me in that in both cases, there's an awful lot that isn't said, and I don't mean just in the script, but in the lyrics. They're very round characters, and so sometimes they can take work. I'm kind of glad that my first musicals were ones that tend to take work. And so, for example, I'm probably going to look a little ignorant in saying this, but Uncle Vanya, I love it deeply, didn't get it the first time. These people standing around fighting about not much. I had to understand why this was supposed to be important. And you get it partly in that there's as much that isn't said as that's said. That's also true. And now I'm really going to get in trouble. I didn't like Into the Woods at first. I thought that Joanna's performance was absolutely brilliant, but I can't say that I quite understood it. I saw it in previews. Boom Crunch was still in it. And I thought, what beautiful music, what fantastic performances, but what exactly was that? And I can't say that I truly got it and started playing the album until I happened to be dragooned into playing for it in the pit when I was in graduate school. So I had to hear it about 25 times. And on about the 10th time, I thought, wait, this is War and Peace. This is a work of genius. But I didn't get it the first time. It wasn't music then. And to me, that richness is what makes it such a perfect experience.
Yeah, it's deceptive and it's easy to dismiss as, oh, act one is this and then act two is this and I like it and I don't like it, but it's going to get you. It's why every production that the kids of every production from every high school and believe me now, this is, I'm the sort of flashpoint for them to communicate. It's had such a profound effect on them because of what's underneath, and they're leaving their teenage lives, and their young lives and going out into the world. It gets you.
Well, I'm blessed. Every year I have no more in my various classes, Afro-American studies. It could be from Plato to Foucault or whatever. But that one song, eliminated in the movie, so much for Hollywood, so sad. But the darkness, the dimness, the grimness, and yet still that free play of intelligence, still the connection of one generation to the next, wrestling with the Oedipus complex, and then going forward, stepping forward. It's almost like Denver stepping out of that house in Beloved, Toni Morrison's Beloved. Somehow we've got to keeping on. See, that's a tragicomic sensibility that Sondheim just took to the height, not just in theater. See, I don't believe in confining these artists to genre in this sense. You see, I compare him to Tennessee Williams, I compare him to Melville, I compare him to Faulkner, I compare him to all tragic comic artists who are working within the context of their particular genre. It can be film and so forth. And in that sense, you get a broader conversation of these towering artists and the ways in which they're trying to define what it means to be human under these dire circumstances. And we know the backdrop. His mother writing the note, I have no regrets in life other than giving you birth. And when he told me that, I said, brother, I've been a Black man in America for almost 50 years. I do not know that level of alienation and hurt. My mama loved me.
That was a bad
Where'd
one.
you get the courage? Where'd you get the creativity to transform that kind of trauma and wound into dishing out what you gave to the world? You just got to pay homage to something like that.
And it is amazing also how connected to children he is in so many of his works, not having had any himself, and yet he seems to really inhabit the child sensibility, and children come up in several of those shows.
And that's where the wounds begin. And those wounds are always fresh with him. I mean, Donna knows, and Donna and I are sorority sisters, because anybody who's created, a Sondheim role and been there, we all have this. It's his family. And I once said to him, you've made this family, because it's a point of recognition with each other from having done one of your shows and having roles built on our bones that makes us, familiar to each other, even more familiar to each other.
What a personal healing device he came up with to create family after family with these extraordinary shows in which he got to express all his paternal instincts, really, parental instincts.
Yes, I saw an interview with him recently. I can't remember which it was, who was interviewing him, but he was asked if he had regrets about not having had children, and he said, "I do. I wish I had had children or a child." He said, "But the other alternative is art and the creation of it and leaving it and teaching it, and all those, and not teaching art, but the kind of artist he was a teacher to all of us, both when he was, in the formal act of teaching, because he did love doing that and occasionally on occasion did that, but
And was really good at it too. He was a terrific teacher,
oh,
actually.
you could tell just the way he would talk to you, to an individual who he was working with. Excuse me.
You can see it in the company documentary, what a good
Yes.
teacher he was.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And then the letters back and forth, his commitment to communicating with people who wrote to him, people he most likely, the bulk of which he would never meet, but a commitment to somebody came at him with an energy and a question or a comment, an observation, and he would not shut the door on that. He was going to respond. There was going to be, an answer, some nature of conversation. I mean,
Huge generosity of spirit.
I mean, that fusion of genius and generosity is a rare thing.
Yes.
And then to cast it in a pedagogical form at the deepest level of teaching, because he says in the text, teaching is a sacred profession. He's teaching in his complex art. He's teaching as he talks to Brother Miranda and the other younger generation in that sense. And he's also paying tribute to Oscar Hammerstein II, Professor Barrow at Williams College, Professor Babbitt at Princeton, Lapine, Prince, all of these folk feeding into teaching him, including these two wonderful artists that we have right here on the stage. You all were teaching him too. It was a mutual thing. So he understood the ways in which deep paideia, deep education, has its sacred qualities and will be manifest in relation to our vocations, our callings. And he believed in a deep sense of calling, mastery of craft. God is in the details, tied to the content dictates form, tied to less is better, in service of what? Clarity, clarity, clarity. None of this avant-garde sense of obscurity and difficulty. I'm so deep that nobody can understand me but me and my mama on a good day. No. That's not Sondheim. He is like Tolstoy, Chekhov, clear and yet profound. Simple, but yet profound.
Right. Never sacrificing nuance or complexity, but always presented in a way that, even the kids love it.
And yet, always giving pleasure. He strikes me in that I started with him, and then I thought, well, if a little night music is so good, let's hear all the rest of him. And there wasn't as much of him in 1985, and so I kind of grabbed it all. And it was right during Sunday, I think. And so then I got into other musical theater, and my general feeling was always that most of the other people somehow weren't as good as him. And part of what I meant by that was just consistency, in that I'm pretty sure I've heard probably about 96% of his songs in one place or another, because I'm obsessive about things. And I'm only aware of a single melody of his where I must admit that I think, oh, that one isn't as good as, the 4,000 others. And I'm not going to say what it is because it doesn't matter. But there's only one where I think that is not an incredible melody. The harmony under this is not especially interesting. Only one time in that entire career. That's genius. And it means that anything he's doing, not only is it clear, it might be severe, it might disturb you, it might be sad, but it always gives pleasure in that aspect of the craft and how his work sat on the ear. And yet it wasn't simple. Somehow he could do that. It's complex, and yet you love it. It's always like wine or bourbon. That was something he was very good at.
Right. And you know, I've often heard it said that the distinction you make, that one can make between poetry and lyrics, is that you have to be able to grasp, you know, almost all of the lyric as it's going by. And if so that, you know, a poem is too dense or nuanced and isn't necessarily something you can grasp as it goes by orally. But these lyrics of Steve's have this astonishing capacity to be comprehended as they're going by in real time. You might not get everything, but it's amazing how much you do get. And that, I'm in awe.
Part of it, though, was his generosity was he surrendered his genius to inhabiting character. So he's writing from the vantage point of characters. He's writing from the vantage point of the actors and actresses. And you see, poetry sits autonomously. It sits on its own. His lyrics, with the exception of two songs, Opening Doors, Finishing the Hat. There he says quite explicitly, this is an expression of my internal personal experience. Opening Doors, trying to get that first breakthrough. And Finishing the Hat, creating something that's there that wasn't there before. The sheer artistic process of creativity, you see. But other than that, it's inside of the characters. It's inside of the character. It can't sit alone without the larger context of the play. It's very Chekhovian because it's ensemble. They're so tied together, intertwined and interdependent. And of course, the actors know that he's getting inside of you, right? That's what his lyrics are doing.
And really, those two songs that you mentioned really are about those characters, aren't they? Because Finishing the Hat is about the obsessiveness of Seurat and his absolute, he's just hell-bent on completing that work of art at the expense of everything else in his life, including all his relationships with human beings. He's gonna dump it all just so we can put that last dot on there.
But you can see, brother Sondheim inside of that. It spills over beyond the character in that sense.
Yeah.
But you don't.
You know what I mean?
You walk away. I saw Donna in Passion. I saw you at a matinee, and then I had to go to Steve's for dinner. One of these confluences of events that was just like about
What a night.
So, but you were singing. I think you were singing "Loving You." That this is and you don't finish that song, and I'm thinking, wow, that's Steve. You finished the song, I went, wow, Donna. Wow, Fosca, because that's the generosity where you know this is on you. This is your gristle, your voice, your heartbeat. This is the pulse of you as an actor and as a character. And you knocked me out. And then later when I went to dinner, I said, wow, Steve. But you know, it at the moment, actor to actor, I thought, this is what we long for, the chance to have something built on our bones. And he doesn't have to sign his name to it. He does in the macro, but in the micro, this is where we get to feed our drive.
And that's the one. Loving you is not a choice, it's who I am. That's the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, boy, that's a Kairos moment in the history of American theater right there.
And he resisted writing that song. He didn't think that we needed a song in that moment. And
Really?
it was funny because when we were workshopping it, I remember just other company members coming up to me and saying, you know, you need to sing in that scene. She needs to sing. It was very early on. And that was the last piece of music to come in. I'm pretty sure of that. We did also play around with the finale, which was connected to that theme and another theme. But he felt like, no, I don't need to hammer them over the head with this, and I don't want to make it a sentimental moment. And James was really clear in communicating to him, and eventually persuasive in saying, we want the audience to be able to hear, and I think we need to shift the gear of how we're delivering this information about this character's self-awareness of who she is and what her love the effect it may have. And she has said it in certain ways, but I feel he felt like it needed to be said in another. And ultimately, Steve wrote that. He actually, the song was longer for one performance. It had like this other sort of rolling. She said a lot more to get to what really needed to be said, and it was given to me. Well, it came over my fax machine, like gold being spun off of a wheel, and I just was like weeping, saying to my husband, "Oh my God, here it is! It's coming! It's here! Oh my God!" And the next day we went over it, and James said, "Okay, we'll put it in tonight." And I said, "Well, there's no orchestration." He said, "We'll do it with piano." And I said, "Yes, we will. Yes, we will." And we did it, and they knew that it belonged, but we all agreed that we didn't need that front part of it, and just the heart of it and the core of it was there. And I sometimes just can't believe that I was in that situation, in that journey to that song, that moment. I want to add something that's related to what Dr. West was saying earlier about the generosity. And so we're telling a story about a character. We were all telling a story about a character who was unbearable in many ways, and trying to determine to what degree you listen to the audience, as we always do during a preview and performance process. What are they getting? What is the response? What are they telling you? And yet you don't want to compromise the sort of point of the story or a big factor of the story. And yet at the same time, if the audience is not coming away with really receiving the story, you have a problem. And it was a very divisive piece. But I recently heard again in another interview, because I've just been wanting to hear his voice and wanting to hear him talk about his process. So over the past months, I've listened several times a week to interviews of his and watched them. And he was talking about, in the end, it must connect with the audience. I need to know that I'm giving them something that they are truly receiving. And sometimes I'm more successful than others, but so that was one of the big challenges in our piece. And I think it was successful in some people's minds and not in others. And there was further work to be done. But again, that, as you said, he wants to, and John said it too, he wants to give pleasure. And even when something is quite dark, finding the comedy in it, because that's life. That is life. Both things are true at the same time,
That's the Chekhov of it all.
The Chekhov of it all, the Shakespeare of it all.
Exactly.
Right?
That's a very interesting story, because I get where he was coming from at the beginning. He
Mhm.
wanted to leave it implied. And
Yeah.
there's a take on that character where you don't necessarily need to hear her. And the truth is, I have always thought that song was golden. I can't imagine Passion without it now. But a little bit of me has always thought, does she need to say it? I almost would find her more interesting if I had to work that out myself. So I know what he meant, but then
Yeah.
this is theater, and you have to speak to people. That's so interesting about that song. Yeah.
And I did too. Whatever they decided, I was not going to fight for it, because so much of what James wrote in this, and I'm assuming it was similar for you, Joanna, when they collaborated, James and Steve, James would write a monologue or a scene. Sometimes we would stage it before it was musicalized. Steve would come in with the piece, with this song, a scene that was now musicalized. Very little had to be restaged, because it was the scene. And he very, again, graciously and generously said, well, James is a poet. So I borrow from his poetry. I then have to shift things for rhyme schemes, etc. But the essence of the song was so often what James had written as a monologue or as a scene that involved a number of people. So in that scene, I just, kept her trying to make the points as honestly as she could, and feeling what she felt and being aware of what he felt. It broke my heart that the audience didn't get it, because I had no objectivity about it, obviously. But again, it was collaborative, and I don't think there was a right or a wrong, but ultimately they made that decision. I think for most people it was helpful, but it's so interesting, John, to hear your point of view about, you didn't really feel like we necessarily needed that.
Necessarily, yeah.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
imagine an alternate version.
Yes. And it's also true that Brother Sondheim didn't fall in love until he was 60 years old, right, with Brother Peter. So that the level of and scope of empathy and imagination of really spending so much of your life in the skin of others, namely the characters. See, that's the great novelist. You see, that's Dickens. That's George Eliot. That's Dostoevsky. You spend so much time in walking in the shoes of others that finally, when that most powerful force hits your soul, because this is what 1994, so he's 64 when the play comes out. He's just fell in love just about 3.5 years before, because he's born in 1930, right? So in 1990, he finally, boom, he hits, and we know that's fundamental transformation. That's revolution in your life when the real love hits you, you see. You say, oh, Steve, company, oh, you 40 years old. He doesn't know, no, he's working with Mary Rogers on that, trying to work through her marriage and get a sense of what it's like to deal with marriage. He's still a certain kind of outsider. Now he's completely on the inside. And yet he still got to look at it through the vantage point of a character, a bit more complicated in terms of biography and artistic production.
Interesting. Do you feel like Steve Sondheim changed in the later part of his life, and that it affected his work and the kind of musical theater he was generating? I mean, I know, just speaking as a person who knew him as a friend, that I observed that he became much less snarky in his final years and was more, sort of warm, even avuncular even, which was a word I would have never thought to use for Steve when I was younger. But honestly, he became much more relaxed and warm and easy and convivial in a way that some essential anxiety seemed to have really subsided. And I'm wondering whether you think that's observable in the works that came later on.
Only some, but he could still do something like Bounce / Roadshow, where I wouldn't say that very interesting experiment exudes the sort of thing you're talking about, the way Into the Woods does, for example, or the way that Sunday in the Park does. Some, but not all. He retained us. There was still a little bit of snarkiness, or you might want to call it playfulness, the bold, bright colors, but some, I would say. I don't know if I would know from his oeuvre that his life changed significantly during that later part just by listening to all of the cast albums in a row.
Yeah, I
agree. I take your point. Yeah,
I agree. But there was a searching in that early work before pre Heart opening. There was a searching for it, and there were hundreds of ways to manifest it or to show the searchers. And I just know in his personal life, love rounded him. There was a softness to him that came through, a tenderness in our correspondence, or when we were together, an open affection that I hadn't felt earlier. And because he had a mirror off which to bounce, that, am I okay to be this way? And yes, you are, because I love you. It was an open exchange. That was the change I noticed. I didn't feel it as much in his later work. I think he had things he wanted to say, and he wanted to keep working. Always panicked that the well would run dry after a certain age.
Right. He was still working on a show.
Yes.
At the end of his life based on Buñuel movies,
Yes.
right?
Right.
John, no, with
Ives.
David Ives.
With David Ives, yeah.
Yes, right.
And I mean, we're all wondering how much of it he actually was able to create and whether we'll ever see any part of it. I'm so curious,
He says in one of his writings, though, it reminds me a little bit of Arthur Miller, that as he gets older, he sees more clearly the decline, if not decay, of Hollywood and the theater, the self-indulgence, the pseudo-avant-gardist gestures, the folk not doing their homework, the folk thinking that somehow the commercial values and the market values beginning to take over. And so I think that's one factor among a whole host of factors, personal and so forth and so on, that's also worth noting. And that's not just a matter of growing old. If he was growing old and there was still a golden age of musical theater, he would have been going to the theater 3 times a day rather than 4 times a week, because he was still at the theater all the time. There's many times I look up and see Brother Sondheim sitting there, and he just wanted to check out the next talent, see what it was like and so forth. But he was so committed to keeping alive the best of the musical theater. That's part of his generosity for the younger generation, but he knew they were against overwhelming odds in terms of the relative decadence that we see in the culture, be it musical theater, be it TV, be it a whole host of other genres.
Right. The allowing of off rhymes alone
Yeah,
was probably driving crazy.
that's exactly that's true.
The allowing of a ballad that doesn't end by modulating up a half step and belting out to the heavens. The bravery of a ballad for an actor, you know, that we've been drowned out a bit.
Right. So I'm sure he squirmed a lot in those last years in the theater. But, you know, sometimes stuff would come along and he would be thrilled.
Absolutely.
Hamilton.
Absolutely.
And, was a huge advocate for Lin-Manuel, and, you know,
Absolutely.
good that he did. So, yeah, so I'm going to peek at the questions here to see if there's something fun that we can dive into. I'm just looking here. I mean, there's a question for Joanna and Donna. Is there a role in the Sondheim canon you haven't played that you would want to tackle? And why is it Mrs. Lovett?
We're gonna have to duke it out.
That's very funny.
That's hilarious. I think all that's left for me right now is Raisins Liaisons. I think I want them to wheel me out, on the wheelchair, sing the song, dive, get wheeled off, go home. You know, that might be it. I would have loved to have been, you know, one gets, how should we say, typecast, and those kinds of things happen. But in my heart of hearts, is there a role, Donna? Is there one for you? I mean,
A few. I mean, I would love to play Desiree, and then Raisins Liaisons.
yeah.
And I would love to play Mrs. Lovett.
I would think that would be exciting. Joanna, you could play Mrs. Lovett.
Yes,
But
that's
that's
why I said we're gonna have to duke this out, honey. Or you know, we're gonna split the
We'll
performance.
split the week. We'll split the week. But that role, that is not an easy role to sing. That
No.
show is not easy to sing. And hats off to everybody who's done that role, or
Yeah.
any of the folks in that show.
Right.
I love that show. But I love Sunday in the Park with George. Something happened to me when I saw that show, which was just prior to our show. It transported me in a way, Mandy and Bernadette particularly, and the visual aspects of it. This is James in all his brilliant, you know, artistic sense. I was devastated with and happy at the same time with that show.
I saw that show at a time when I was seriously considering leaving the business. I was in my 20s. It's not like I'd been around that long, but I just thought, people don't seem to know what to do with me casting wise, and I want to feel more productive in my life. And maybe there's a way, maybe it's teaching, maybe it's doing drama therapy, maybe it's going to law school. I really was exploring different things, and my husband scraped up the money for us to get some really great seats to what was supposed to be Mandy's last performance. Actually, he ended up coming back to the show, but and from practically the first chord, I was in a state of arrest, and I thought, well, this was just written for me, really, so that I could walk away knowing I must stay and continue doing what I'm doing. And I remember standing up and out loud saying, thank you. It was to everybody, to God, to Steve, to Mandy, to Bernadette, and to my husband, and to the universe for putting me in that moment, and that this show existed, and it did just crack my heart open and make me braver.
Donna, can I ask you, what was it like doing Cora and Anyone Can Whistle at Encores? What was it like playing that role? Was it difficult? You were wonderful, but what was it? What was
Thank
that
you.
like? Such a strange part.
It was a strange show, but and I've done a few shows at Encores, and there's always a point, about 2 or 3 days into it that you go, what the was I thinking? Because it's a lot of material to own, and I've done Wonderful Town and then Follies and Cora and Wonderful Town. There was a lot of choreography, and I'm not a dancer. I mean, I love to dance, but I'm not a trained dancer. So I had said, if you want me to do this, we have to start early, giving me, I mean, I don't expect
My
to pay
Town,
for it,
right.
so that I don't slow down everybody else and screw it up. And I wanted to own it. And I didn't want Casey Nicola, who was our wonderful director choreographer, to minimize what he envisioned. But to get back to the part, I loved her. I mean, it was true satire. And I thought when I say we all, I remember talking with Raul Esparza and Sutton Foster, who were also playing principal roles in the show. And we were saying, as we went in our little tight, condensed mini process, this show is more relevant and more juicy to chew on as an actor than any of us really anticipated. And I only wish we had more time. And I think that there's a relevance to it now. It could take some revision and recasting, but I don't know. I think that I've heard Steve and then Arthur, who was still with us, say, that I believe he was still with us, say that they didn't know what they were doing. They were just kind of playing in a sandbox. But you take really smart people and they play. There's something being said, and we just all thought there's something here that would be really great to have an opportunity to explore further. And I loved being given the opportunity to play that kind of out there, just the stakes were all about her. So she didn't care how she got what she wanted. She would do anything to get what she wanted, kind of character, and have fun with it, but also be allowed to play, sing, it's not Before the Parade Passes By, Did a Parade. I'm so embarrassed that I'm misnaming the title of Stephen Sondheim.
Because you've also done the Hello Dolly song.
Yeah.
Did a parade go by?
Yeah. Did a parade go by, and to really be able to play it from a place of a real person. Shit, I'm missing out on something. That where the stakes could be high in that way too, and yet I could be throwing myself on the ground, shamelessly, for in the satire of and the comedy of that. I had a blast.
Somebody's going to correct us. A parade in town.
Oh, thank God.
Somebody's going to say something.
I will be shamed. Thank you for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a couple of the questions have been asking what was each of our favorite Sondheim shows, and although we've partially talked about it, we haven't actually committed to answering that question. It might be fun to go around and see what everybody has to say. I mean, obviously, is it the one you were in or no? So Joanna, what was your fave?
Mine was A Little Night Music.
And I guess that was yours too, right, John?
That's my favorite musical of all time, if I have to pick one. Although, of course, I have 25 favorite musicals, but that will always be my darling. Yeah.
Wow. How about you, Dr. Cornell?
And when it comes to Brother Sondheim, it depends on which day of the week. You know, Friday night, Sweeney Todd, Mondays, Company, Wednesday, Sunday night in the park with George. But then Into the Woods touches me on levels that I don't have yet to fully come to terms with. And Assassins hit me hard. It really did. So that when you have that kind of like, which favorite novel of Dostoevsky, favorite novel of Toni Morrison, depends on which day of the week, what mood I'm in. What's favorite song of John Coltrane? Depends on what my situation is, you know. So that once you get that level of genius, it's really hard to zero in.
It is. It's almost criminal to narrow it down. Well, nobody mentioned my favorite, so I feel compelled to say that my big epiphany about Steve's work was Pacific Overtures.
Well, then that's
because
another.
I was the perfect age to see it. I was in my mid-20s, and I somehow felt like I was comprehending a work of art at a level that I never had before, and that it was all being served to me in this incredible, you know, just lush, delicate platter of yumminess. I just couldn't get over it. I couldn't get over it.
I get the feeling if I had been old enough to see the original Follies, that would be my favorite. But I can't see it. And so I've just seen other magnificent Follieses. But people say you have to have been there to see the original. I'll bet that would have been my favorite. Yeah.
I wish I'd seen all the originals, not just Follies.
Right, because there's a stunningness to the event of it, of it being the first time you've seen it and the first time it's broken on the scene. That is irreplaceable by any. Revivals have been magnificent, and I've loved many, many of them. But to see a show when it's first come around.
Right. I went to Sweeney Todd when it was first upon us, and I was with my dad, and he was very out of sorts at Sweeney Todd. My dad was, and I think he was just plain jealous because he clearly perceived how brilliant it was.
Your dad was in the 4th row on the aisle to see Into the Woods, yes. And at one point in the song in Act 2, which is the great kind of monologue song to do, there was some rhyme or something I said, and I heard your father loud and clear, and I actually saw him, he went, ah.
He was not the quietest theater goer that I ever That's perfect.
And another one of the teachers of Brother Sondheim. I mean, you know, for him to bring in West Side Story, 25, 26, 27 years old, let's take a risk. Let's see what we can do with it. Much is to be said for something like that, given the stature of Brother Leonard himself, you know.
Indeed, and he didn't want to take the job because he was a composer / lyricist, and he didn't want to be restricted just to writing lyrics. And Oscar Hammerstein said, you take that gig. It'll be good for you to work with those guys. And I dare say, it not only was it good for Steve, but it was very good for the show. Because up until that point, my father had been writing the lyrics. I don't know whether you knew, but he was originally going to write the music and the lyrics.
And some of them are still in there, right?
Some, it's not clear which, but I will tell you that there was an exhibit about my dad in Carnegie Hall about 10 or 15 years ago. And there were these, yellowed, well, they were yellow already, legal pages of lyrics in my father's handwriting. Some were for West Side Story, and one of them was for Maria. And the lyric in my father's handwriting went, Maria, it's a sound like there's music playing. It's a sound like in church when they're praying. Thank God they brought it.
Not quite the same, right?
Say it loud, and there's music. Say it soft, and it's almost like praying. Thank you.
You know, I also heard a story too that in terms of the royalties, you know, where Brother Leonard's supposed to get 3% and Brother Stephen is going to get 1%, and your father said, no, we get 2%. It's going to be egalitarian, no matter what. And then Sondheim said, no. We're going to go with what the contract is. But that kind of generosity from Bernstein to Sondheim is something that feeds into the generosity from Sondheim to younger generation and to all of us who had a chance.
Although Steve did say later that he kicked himself for
Well, yeah,
having
he said
agreed
that.
to the lower.
No, that's true. No, he did say, you're right. You're right.
You know who else said at him, come to think of it? Cole Porter. He says somewhere that when he played for Cole Porter the NEIOU lyric, that Cole
Yes.
Porter in his later in life kind of stupor said, so there's something about his writing that creates that. That's probably the last thing Cole Porter ever said, but it came from the gypsy lyric.
That's wonderful.
It's a hell of a lyric.
Do you have a favorite show, Donna?
Well, like Dr. West, it's like, choosing a favorite child, and not because I birthed them. It's a tie, I would say, between Sunday in the Park with George and A Little Night Music. And the first time I saw Little Night Music was a college production that a friend of mine was playing Desiree in. She was 20 and it was out on Long Island, and I was at NYU and I was 18, and I saw it and I loved it. And I wasn't familiar with the score or the show, except for Send in the Clowns, because I'd seen Judy Collins sing it on The Tonight Show.
Right.
And was mesmerized and haunted by it. Just was melodically something that was unlike anything I'd heard. But anyway, I fell in love with the show. I then saw it in my 30s, and I had such a completely different experience and identified with different characters. I then saw it in my 40s, and what I realized is that when I finally saw it, well, I guess the last production I saw, I was in my 50s on Broadway. I saw it twice, both when the revival was done with Catherine and Angela,
Elaine,
and then I saw Bernadette and Elaine do it. But prior to that, the production I'd seen before that was part of the Sondheim celebration at the Kennedy Center. And I was in my 40s then, and it was the first time that I cried so much during it. And Sean, my late husband, said, "What do you think that's about?" And I said, "Because I'm getting closer and closer to being a fool, one of the fools,
Wow.
And I was watching it from a different perspective. And now, as I mature, as I age, I see and feel it in a different way. So that's one of the reasons. I mean, in addition to it being genius, pure genius on so many levels, it's just my appreciation of it, and how it's affected me at these different decades in my life.
I think that's true for so many of his shows that you can, if you're lucky, you see them at different phases in your life, and then you see them in a different way, relate to different characters, and it's almost like the show grows with you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That was certainly happening to me when I saw this most recent production of Company. And I think I asked that all the way back when we began, and I never found out whether any of you actually saw it or have seen it. And you did, Donna?
I was at the opening, and I had a great time. It was very bittersweet, because it was very close to his passing, and I always say when I go to an opening night that I'm there to celebrate that this production, whatever it is, whether it's something new or it's a revival, a re-envisioning. So I don't feel like I'm seeing it at my most objective, which of course is not objective, it's subjective, but there is, because I'm playing several roles in being there. I'm there to support it. I'm there, if I've been invited by the PR people, my presence is in some way part of promoting it, or, letting my voice be lent to, a conversation about the piece. I loved seeing a very new take on it. And there were things I thought really, really worked about it. And there were other things that I questioned, but not to the point where I went, "Oh no, this shouldn't have happened." No, I was in a very celebratory, honoring mode, and I've said, I want to go back and see it again when it's not opening night. And I've done that often with productions to see, I don't know if anybody else has felt that way, but that's,
Well, a Sondheim show is always worth seeing more than once, and that's for sure.
Absolutely.
I want to, truly.
Yeah. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
I can't wait to. I mean, it's amazing how these possibilities and modalities within the play itself. I remember one where they had all instruments.
Mhm.
All the different characters had their instruments, and that turned out. I think it's by Brother Doyle. That turned out to be a very powerful production. I'm sure some of you may have seen that too.
Yes.
That was
Yes.
mind blowing. But it's very interesting. You know, we had a conference at William Patterson a number of years ago about Sondheim's music, and we brought in jazz musicians. And we raised the question why it is jazz musicians tend not to use too many of his works as a launching pad for their work. You got Coltrane, Rogers, Hammerstein, and so forth. So, and the jazz musician said, it looks as if he's explored so many of the modalities and possibilities in the music itself. There's not a lot of empty space for us to take off and improvise. And then they asked Brother Sondheim, what do you think about that? He said, well, you know, Brahms and the Rachmaninoff and the others means much to me. Of course, Harry Arlen's his favorite. Harry Arlen from Buffalo, that was his favorite now. And he's a blues man. And, you know, he's a blues man from the Jewish and vanilla side of town, but he's, as Ethel Waters said, he's the most Negroid of white men I've ever known in my life. And Harold was cool. Y'all know that. So do you see the connection of Sondheim with the very culture, the Black culture that produced jazz? But it's hard to get the jazz creative appropriations of it because he's just so creative in his tightness of incorporating the possibilities in the very work that he's producing. And you can imagine somebody could write a dissertation on that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I've heard this said also about my dad's music as well, that because it was so knit together, as you put it,
Yeah.
that it didn't give enough breathing room for improvisation.
Now Sarah Vaughan will take it and go to send in the clowns now. Oh,
yeah, I think that one is completely it lends itself to interpretation of any kind, because perhaps it is so spare compared to a lot of other Sondheim songs. It has a lot more air in it.
Right, that's a good point. That's a good point.
You know, I feel guilty that I haven't seen the new company yet, and I haven't hurried, and I'm trying to think about why. And I think part of the reason is that Company, out of all of his shows, for me, is the one that I prefer to just listen to, actually. I love the original album. I think the album is a work of art. And the book is magnificent in its way, but it's been a while, and it's getting ever harder to put those people on stage without it being in the period. And my daughters, who are 7 and 10, love Company. My daughters fight in the car over whether we're going to listen to Company or Follies. And I think that's really cemented it, in that for me, Company is now something that you listen to laying on the couch or something like that. I need to get over that and go see this production, because it's supposed to be something living, not this audiophilic object sitting frozen in my head.
Yeah,
I'm glad we mentioned this.
But the documentary was as satisfying for me as the experience. I do want to go see this. And also Katrina Lenk, first of all, you know, Patty, I adore, but Katrina Lenk was mind-boggling in the band's visit. And I saw that twice, because I had really almost never seen something so completely, continuously, sinuously perfect all the way through a musical. And I love that show. But the documentary of Company, to me, is as satisfied as I need to be with that entire show.
There's some of that, yeah, definitely. It's over there in this room. Yes. Yeah, you should do it once a year. Exactly.
Well, I'm going to I have to go back and see it, because I saw it when it was still in previews in the before times. It, you know, in early March of 2 years ago. And I don't remember it hardly at all, because so much transpired. Yeah, it was as if it were 10 years ago. Who remembers from 2 years ago? You know, there's just been this gigantic blur.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
So,
I tell you, I'm impressed, Brother John. You've got lovely 7-year-old and 10-year-old dealing with the ambivalences and ambiguities of Robert. That is what I call being precocious, my brother. That's
The fun thing is trying to explain to them what Barcelona is about.
You have a lot of splaining to do to your girls, I'm thinking.
And they like it, but they don't understand it. So.
No, I hear you. No, indeed.
Right, it's so catchy.
Mhm.
That's
Uh,
impressive.
Dr. Cornel, I don't know where you were being interviewed, and you sang a bit of Barcelona, both parts. And I thought that was so festive.
Yeah, it tends to go off sometimes involuntarily in context. I should be much more suspicious of, but it just comes out. You're absolutely
Right.
such a beautiful song, though. This
It's a great song.
isn't it?
Genius.
Oh,
A little masterpiece.
it really
Just
is.
imagine someone else writing a song for that moment. What would they come up with? Even the really good people. Sondheim came up with that. That's astonishing.
Isn't that the truth?
And you know, that's one of the highlights, I think, in the new production. I recall that, and with the flight attendant is a guy,
Mhm.
and I
Yeah.
thought it worked great.
That's beautiful.
It
I've got
does.
to see it.
Gotta go see this.
Very effective.
Yeah, I've got to go see it.
Go see it. Don't be scared. Don't be resistant. It's good for you.
Like my house, but I'm gonna get past that.
But it's this pandemic, and trying to make
Used to
these
not
moves.
going anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I wish that Steve had lived long enough to get to the other side of it so that we could all
Oh yeah.
be together. I went to see Assassins and he was in the audience. I guess it was the opening performance. But there were so many people crowding around him, and my sister and I thought we just can't add to the pile. So we didn't get a chance to say hello to him in person. And that was a week before he died.
Ooh.
That really hurt.
Wow.
And so I wrote him an email telling him how much I'd enjoyed the show and how sorry I was I didn't get to give him not that we could really hug, but say hello in person. And he wrote me back an email saying, "Oh, I'm so glad you liked the show. I thought it was fabulous and brilliant the way it was evoked. And let's get together. Let's play anagrams." I mean, there he was, planning to play anagrams sometime. You're gonna love the guy.
That in the last weeks of his life, the last year of his life, there was even during a pandemic, there was so much going on with the film of West Side Story and the pending production of both Assassins and Company, which had been ready to go before we all shut down, but that he got to see those productions and went and saw other theater and was just so active and working on a new show, and that
Yep. He
Thanksgiving.
really left with his boots on, didn't he?
Yeah, and he was with friends Thanksgiving night, and it just it doesn't make me miss him, and the idea of him being in a room with him or listening to something new from him doesn't make that any harder or sadder, but that feels kind of selfish, actually. I'm just so, it brings me a kind of comfort and a joy that he was so engaged in all that he loved.
Yes, and I guess we shouldn't be greedy. We did have him for 91.
91 glorious years. 91 years.
We got a lot of him. So.
It's a long time. Gershwin dead at 39. Coltrane at 40.
Crazy. I mean, really.
Billie Holiday in mid-40s. I mean, somebody with that kind of creativity and deep sense of vocation that you hear in Move On and Sunday in the Park with.
Right.
Deep, Mandy's powerful voice. You can just hear him, Burnett, that calling, vision, self-confidence, stay in motion, fall on your face, bounce back. Yes.
Yes. And we were there. Lucky
Yeah.
us.
And we've got two who are on the inside. I mean, good God.
Right.
Whew,
We're the luckiest ones of all.
that's the truth. That is the truth.
Very lucky indeed. He was endlessly kind and generous with his time. And this, I guess, a few months before he died, he wrote me an email saying, I found the perfect tango CDs for you because I tango. Not that anybody's been dancing for the last 2 years, but he said, I'm going to send them to you.
Oh,
And I just thought, where in the world did you remember that? And did
Oh,
you, that you thought of that? I was so
wow.
touched.
That's so him.
It's him.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
I
Well,
would love to share one thing with all of you because it's something. It's a something by Sondheim that you have never heard before, and he introduced us to playing the game Bartlett's, which is just like the dictionary game, except you have to write quotations and fool each other, and the real quotation is buried amidst all of the entries that everybody else in the room has written, and then you have to vote for the one that you think is the real one, right? And we used to play this in our living room a lot. And needless to say, Steve was really good at this game. So in this one round we were playing, I don't remember who the person was, and it's somebody usually that you've never heard of. You know, Elizabeth Dodge McKillicuddy, 1832 to 1897, go, right? And so this is what Steve, we found out later, wrote. The gallopers breasted the crest of the hill. There was shooting and shouting, and suddenly still. And he just kind of tossed that off in the game.
wow.
And then when all of a sudden he wasn't there anymore, I felt it was like, and suddenly still. It just came back to me. And I felt this yawning silence and emptiness. But I guess we should be very grateful for all that we got.
Absolutely.
It's a magnificent oeuvre. There's a lot of it. There are different versions of everything. It's a great body of work. I do wish we could have had one more thing, but still, it's a great body of work.
Yeah, a lot.
to add, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yesterday, I had a moment. My daughter is a high school student, and they decided to do Into the Woods as their spring musical, and she is auditioning for Little Red, and so she's listened to that score many times and was, I don't know, 7 maybe when I did it in the park for the Shakespeare Festival, but she was preparing, well, actually sight reading to make sure she was getting the right notes, and I was doing my very bad piano playing, but just kind of clink it out for her. And we were talking about how, a particular rest in that music was connected to this shift in Little Red's recognizing that something was more complex than she had seen it in her life up until that moment. And I found myself starting to weep as I talked to her about it. She said, "Oh, Mom, what? And I said, "No, I'm just, I couldn't tell you that, with confidence, that was the composer's choice, but I can, both because that's who he was, and I got to be in the room and listen to him talk about those kinds of choices. And in this particular case, him talk to the actress playing Little Red in the production that we did. And of course, you'll find your own way to play it and realize it, but talk about just, passing it on and how he lives on. And there we were with her saying, "Mom, can you get the Into the Woods score out for me? I decided I want to audition for this." And
Wow.
so he has many children. He has many children, and he's given us, children and art.
Absolutely. One
I
thing.
love that these children are right here with us.
You're
Your very own.
absolutely.
Moms too, right?
But it's also important to remember what his middle name was, Joshua. You see the Jewish roots there in terms of the best of that Jewish culture, the love of language, of words, the free play of words, and then interpretation and intelligence, and then the spreading of that hesed, that loving kindness across the board, with a certain priority for the orphan and widow and fatherless and motherless and persecuted, yes, but he is a part of that rich American Jewish culture. Some of it secular, some of it religious, some of it orthodox, some of it heterodox and polydox and so forth. But we can't overlook that. And yet we recognize that what's at the center of what he's doing is defining what it is to be human. And that's why he speaks so deeply to each and every one of us, no matter who we are.
Geez, that's beautiful. And you know, maybe though that might be our final words, because I see that it's 6:30. I think you put the perfect little punctuation mark on our conversation, unless anyone else has something they really want to add.
Amen. And weren't we blessed?
I think so. And
You were.
it's been wonderful talking to all of you. Thank you. I didn't have to interrupt anybody. You were perfect.
Oh, you were
Timing,
smooth.
timing.
You were like
Such an
Mary Lou
honor.
Williams on the piano, just orchestrating.
Stuff like that.
Smooth as can be, Sister Jamie. Absolutely.
Thank you all so much.
But absolutely,
Thank you,
yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, and
Spectacular.
everybody stay
Brother John.
healthy and see you out on the street one of these days. We're going to be out there.
Definitely.
Okay. Lots of love to all.
Love
Good
you,
night.
love.
You too.
Take good care now.
Bye now.